Bonjour les amis Brown. A couple of things. First, thanks to Mr. Bickerton, who pointed out this morning that I forgot to distribute the math page from last week. So I put up the video about linear equations on YouTube, but then didn't distribute the page to you guys in your notebooks. But it's there now, or should be there now. Secondly, and most importantly, or more importantly, our neighbor said they saw a cougar in our woods back here 2 nights ago. So if you see anything sneaking up behind me, please let me know and warn me before we get going. As always, I have my trusty Malamute here. You guys see that? You see her there? Yep, panting heavily. Not sure what use she'd be against a cougar. More of a sitting dog at this point in her career. You should lie down, Molly. Whatever. Okay, so chapter 5. In our discussion last week, I told you guys it's a big one, and it is. There are 20 pages left in the book. Each chapter is about 10 pages, so they're quicker chapters than before. But lots happens. We'll get right into it. One end of the great barn was piled high with new hay, and over the pile hung the 4-taloned Jackson fork suspended from its pulley. The hay came down like a mountain slope on the other end of the barn, and there was a level place as yet unfilled with the new crop. At the sides of the feeding racks were visible, and between the slats the heads of horses could be seen. It was Sunday afternoon. The resting horses nibbled the remaining wisps of hay, and they stamped their feet and they bit the wood of their mangers and rattled their halter chains. The afternoon sun sliced in through the cracks of the barn walls and lay in bright lines on the floor. He always talks about the sun and how the sun comes into buildings, eh? That's like something that is really consistent about the book. Always talks about what the sun's doing. There was a buzz of flies in the air and the lazy afternoon humming. From outside came the clang of horseshoes on the playing peg and the shouts of men playing, encouraging, jeering. Sunday's their day off, right? But in the barn it was quiet and humming and lazy and warm. Only Lenny was in the barn, and Lenny sat in the hay beside a packing case under the manger in the end of the barn that had not been filled with hay. Lenny sat in the hay and looked at the little dead puppy that lay in front of him. Lenny looked at it for a long time, and then he put out his huge hands and stroked it. He stroked it clear from one end to the other, and Lenny said softly to the puppy, "Oh, why'd you get killed? Why'd you have to get killed? You ain't so little as mice. I didn't bounce you so hard." He bent the puppy's head up and looked in its face, and then he said to it, "Now maybe George isn't going to let me tend to the rabbits if he finds out you got killed." He scooped a little hollow and laid the puppy inside and covered it with hay, out of sight, but he continued to stare at the mound that he had made. He said, "This ain't no bad thing. I don't have to go hide in the bush. I don't have to go there. This ain't so bad. I'll tell George I found it dead." He unburied the puppy and inspected it. He stroked it from ears to tail again. He went on sorrowfully, "But he'll know. George always knows. He'll say that I done it. Don't try to put nothing over me, he'll say. Oh, no, now I'll not be able to tend to no rabbits." Suddenly his anger rose. "Ah, damn you," he cried. "Why'd you have to get killed? You ain't so little as mice." He picked up the pup and hurled it from him. He turned his back on it. He sat bent over his knees and whispered, "Now I won't get to tend to no rabbits. Now he won't let me." He rocked himself back and forth slowly. From outside came the clang of horseshoes on the iron stake and a little bit of a chorus of cries. Lenny got up and brought the puppy back and laid it down in the hay and sat down. He started stroking the puppy again. "You just wasn't big enough," he said. "They told me and told me and told me you wasn't big enough. I didn't know you'd get killed so easy." He worked his fingers on the little pup's limp ear. "Maybe George won't care," he said. This here goddamn little son of a bitch wasn't nothing to George." Curly's wife came around the end of the last stall. She came very quietly. Quietly so that Lenny didn't see her. She wore her bright cotton dress and the mules with the red ostrich feathers. Her face was made up, and she had little sausage curls that were all in place that hung on either side of her face. She was quite near him before Lenny looked up and saw. In a panic, he shoveled hay over the puppy with his fingers and looked up sullenly at her. She said, "What you got there, sonny boy?" Lenny glared at her. "George says I ain't gonna have nothing to do with you. Not talk to you or nothing," she laughed. "George doesn't give you orders, does he? Does he tell you to do anything? Does he give you orders about everything, Lenny?" Lenny looked down at the hay. "He says I can't have no rabbits if I talk to you or nothing," she said quietly. "He's scared Curly's gonna get mad. Well, Curly's got his arm in a sling." And if Curly gets tough, you can break the other hand, can't you? You didn't put nothing over me about getting his hand caught in the machine. But Lenny was not to be drawn. No, sir, I ain't gonna talk to you or nothing. She knelt in the hay beside him. Listen, she said, all the guys got horseshoe tenements going on. It's only about 4 o'clock. None of them guys is gonna leave the tenement. Why can't we talk? I never get to talk to nobody. I'm awfully lonely. Remember we talked about loneliness in the chat there. Lenny said, well, I ain't supposed to talk to you or nothing. I get so lonely, she said. You can talk to people, but I can't talk to nobody but Curly. Else he gets mad. How do you like to not to talk to nobody? Lenny said, well, I ain't supposed to. George is scared I'll get into trouble. She changed the subject. What you got covered up there, boy? Then all of a sudden Lenny's woe came back to him. It's just my pup, he said sadly. It's just my little pup. And he swept it. And then he swept the hay from off top of it. Oh, he's dead, she cried. He was so little, said Lenny. I was just playing with him. I was just playing with him. And and then he was dead. She consoled him. Don't you worry none. He was just a mutt. You can get another one easy. The whole country is full of mutts. It ain't that so much, Lenny explained miserably. George ain't gonna let me tend to the rabbits now. Why don't he? Well, he says if I done any more bad things, he ain't gonna let me tend to the rabbits. She moved closer to him, and she spoke soothingly. Don't you worry about talking to me. Listen to the guys yell out there. They got $4 bet on the tenement. None of them are gonna leave until it's over. If George sees me talking to you, he'll give me hell, Lenny said cautiously. He told me so. Her face grew angry. What's the matter with me? She cried. Ain't I got a right to talk to nobody? What they think I am anyways? You seem like a real nice guy. I don't know why I can't talk to you. I don't do no harm to you. George says you're gonna get us in a mess. Aw, nuts, she said. What kind of harm am I doing there just sitting there with you? Seems like they ain't none. Seems like none of them cares how I gotta live. I tell you, I ain't used to living like this. I could have made something of myself, she said darkly. Maybe I will yet. And then her words tumbled out of a passion of communication, as though she hurried before her listener could be taken away. I lived right in Salinas, she said. Come there when I was a little kid, and when I show up, I met me one of them actors. And he says I could go on with him to the show, but my old lady wouldn't let me. She said because I was only 15. But the guy says I could have. And if I went, I could have been in a show. I could be living the dream, she said. Lenny stroked the pup back and forth. We're going to have a little place in Rabbits, he explained. She went on with her story quickly before she could be interrupted. Another time I met another guy, and he was in the pictures. He went outside to the Riverside Dance Palace with him. He says he was going to put me back in the movies. He said I was a natural. Soon he's going to be back from Hollywood, and he's going to rat me. She looked closely at Lenny to see whether she was impressing him. I never got that letter, she said. I always thought my old lady stole it. Well, I wasn't going to stay no place where I couldn't get nowhere or make something of myself. And when they're going to steal your letters. I asked her if she stole it too, but she said no. So I married Curly. Met him right there at the Riverside Dance Palace that same night. You listening? Who, me? Yeah, sure. Well, I ain't told nobody this before, but I ought to. I don't like Curly. He ain't a nice fella. And because she had confided in him, she moved closer to Lenny and sat beside him. I could have been in the movies. I could have had nice clothes. All them nice clothes that they all wear in the pictures. And I could have had a big hotel, and they would have taken pictures of me. When they had them previews, I would have been in them. I would have spoken on the radio. It wouldn't have cost me a cent because I was in the picture. I could go see the movies for free. All of them in their nice clothes. Because this is what the guy said. He said I was a natural. She looked up to Lenny, and she made a small grand gesture with her arms to hand to show how she could act. Her fingernails trailed after her, leading her wrist, and a little finger stuck out gradually, slightly from the rest. Lenny sighed deeply. From outside came the clang of horseshoes on metal, and then the chorus of cheers. Somebody made a ringer, said Curly's wife. Now the light was lifting up as the sun went down, and the sun streaks climbed up the wall and fell over the feeding racks and over the head of the horses. Lenny said, maybe if I took the pup out now and throw him away, George will never know, and then I could tend to the rabbits without any trouble. We're going to have a little place, Lenny explained patiently. We're going to have a house and a garden and a place for alfalfa. And the alfalfa is going to be for the rabbits. And I get to take care of the rabbits. She asked, "What makes you so nuts about rabbits?" Lenny had to think carefully before he could come to a conclusion. He moved cautiously close to her until he was right against her. "I like to pet nice things. I like to pet the nice soft things. And it's nice, you bet. Sometimes I even pet mice. But not when I could get nothing better." Curly's wife moved away from him a little. "I think you're nuts," she said. "No, I ain't," Lenny explained earnestly. "George says I ain't. I like to pet things with my fingers. Soft things." She was a little bit reassured. "Well, who don't, I guess," she said. "Everybody's like that. I like to feel silk and velvet. Do you like to feel velvet?" Lenny chuckled with pleasure. "Oh, you bet." "And I had some, too. A lady gave me some of her velvet. I got to know. It was my own Aunt Clara. She gave it right to me. About this big piece, and I could stroke it." Then a frown came over his face. "I lost it," he said. "I ain't seen it for a long time now." Curly's wife laughed at him. "You're nuts," she said. "But you're kind of a nice fella. You're just a big baby. Maybe a person can see what you mean. When I'm doing my hair sometimes, I just sit and stroke it because it's so soft." To show how she did it, she ran her fingers over the top of her head. "Some people got kind of coarse hair," she said complacently. "Take Curly. His hair's just like wire, but mine is soft and fine. Of course, I brush it a lot. That makes it fine. Say, hey, feel right here." She took Lenny's hand and put it on her head. "Feel right around there. See how soft that is?" Lenny's big fingers fell to stroking her hair. "Don't muss it up," she said. Lenny said, "Oh, that is nice." And he stroked the hair harder. "It's just so soft. Now look out now, or you'll muss it up." Then she cried angrily, "Stop it now, you're messing it up." She jerked her head sideways and Lenny's fingers closed on her hair and hung. "I said let go. Let go," she said. Lenny was in a panic, his face contorted. She screamed, and then Lenny put his other hand over her mouth and nose. "Please don't," he begged. "Oh, please don't do that. Please, George will get mad." She struggled violently under his hands. Her feet battered on the hay as she writhed to be free, and from under Lenny's hand came a muffled screaming. Lenny began to cry with fright. "Oh, please don't, please, none of that. No, George said no more bad things. He's not going to let me tend to the rabbits." He moved his hand a little bit, and her hoarse cry came out, and Lenny grew angry. "No, don't, he said. "I don't want you to yell. I don't want you to get me in trouble. George says you will. Now don't you do that." As she continued to struggle, her eyes were wide with terror. He shook her then, and he was angry with her. "Don't you go yelling," he said. He shook her again, and her body flopped like a fish. And then she was still, for Lenny had broken her neck. He looked down at her, and carefully he moved his hand from her over her mouth, but she lay still. I said I don't want to hurt you," he said. "But George will be mad if you yell." When she didn't answer, nor move, he bent closely to her. He lifted her arm up and let it drop, and for a moment he seemed bewildered. And then he whispered in fright, I done a bad thing. I done a real bad thing." We're going to pause it there because my battery's going to run out. So I'm going to plug it in, and we'll see the next part of this chapter. Okay?